A second tip to make a smooth delivery is practicing on somebody else. Because there was a day where I was using this app and I thought it was great. I put together this new presentation. I thought it was fabulous. And I delivered it, and someone told me the slides are actually blurry. We can't read what's on the screen. I couldn't figure out what's going on. So I had to go back and give the presentation to a friend and get their perspective to tell me, yes, when you made this switch, then now I can see it, or now the video came through clearly. So we may need to test out our technology on a third party before we actually give it to the world. And they may see elements that we missed because there was no way for us to know how it was being received on the other end. And a third tip, and Tommy, I think this one is maybe the most important one. And let me tell you a story about this.
Hey there, tech enthusiasts. Welcome to Tech Time with Sweet Tea, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of technology and how it can either serve you or, well, not serve you. Here is your host, Sweet Tea, and he's on a mission to help you harness the power of tech in your life. Join him as he chats with people about their tech journeys. From the latest gadgets to digital dilemmas, we'll explore it all. So grab your favorite device, hit that play button, and let's keep it real in the world of tech. Tech Time with Sweet Tea is here to help you stay plugged in and empowered. Let's get started.
Thanks for coming back to Keeping It Real, Tech Time with Sweet Tea, story time, whether it's story time or if I'm talking in the film world. Today, we're going to go a little bit in the speaking presentation world, and I have today a guest that I've been connected with via Toastmasters, Elyssa Schneider. She's going the speaking presentation route, to be a full-time speaker. How are you doing? What are you excited about today, Elyssa?
Oh, Tommy, where do we start? Life is exciting. Particularly, it was great to have the opportunity to give another presentation. And today that was awesome, discussing table topics and impromptu speaking as it pertains to Toastmasters. But every presentation experience is a new opportunity to practice. And it's not just about practice, it's about taking analysis afterwards and saying, where can you improve? And thinking that the next presentation will be your best presentation because you'll have added a new feature, factor, or made a change. So that's what I get excited about.
And yeah, the great things at practice for the sports reference. I don't know how much you follow sports, but we're talking about practice. that famous quote that came from one of the press conferences one time. We're talking about practice.
Right? It applies universally to every aspect of life, and speaking is one aspect where you definitely need that practice. Mm-hmm.
And speaking of practice with tech is really important especially when you implement the tech into your speaking presentation. How much, how little, when do you decide that it's needed? We're going to get into all these topics today, talking with Elyssa Schneider, and I'll give you a chance to put out like your website and everything where people can find you and to talk more interested about. I'll give we call it a plug. Give you that chance at the end before getting to bonus wrap up questions. But I want to start out with saying, and I struggle with this, and you know me as a tech person, tech like pro, but I struggle with this as much as anyone, especially in the speaking world when I'm giving our practice speeches in Toastmasters. I struggle with implementing tech in my speech. I'll think too much on the tech and I forget my speech. Before we get into those specific topics, do you have anything? How do you decide? My first question, really, how do you decide when, where, and if you do need the tech? How do you decide that?
I always remember, Tommy, that the more tech I employ, the more possibilities that there will be an item that will fail somewhere along the line. And so I try to keep it as simple as possible because, like you said, if you're focused on the tech, it can be a distraction for you as the speaker from the presentation you're trying to give. So for me, it's like, what's the minimum amount of tech that I can get away with? For example, when I speak at Toastmasters, I don't use a microphone. I don't use the headphones. I just use the computer microphone that picks up my voice. If I were to speak professionally, I might have to upgrade. But at least for those talks, I know that it's okay. It's going to be sufficient for the audience. And then as far as presentations, I use PowerPoint. I try to implement my slides through the use of PowerPoint. And I have this app that I came across. It's hard to pronounce. It's called There's no vowels in it. It's MMHMM. And it allows you to put your slides in the background behind you. So again, there's just so many different ways to play it, but it's about becoming comfortable with the technology, practicing with it ahead of time, recording yourself. That's huge. It's doing it so much that you don't even think about it. It comes as a second nature. And that's when you know that you've really reached the peak performance level, is when you don't have to think about it anymore. It's now down to muscle memory.
Yes, and I was actually gonna bring up we were just 2 hours ago. Elyssa was given a presentation on table topics. We're coming into contest, if you're familiar with Toastmasters table topics contest, and she's been given table topics presentation. We just came off a presentation, and she gave a speech to my home club, Verbal Expressions and Toastmasters. And I was gonna actually ask about that, what were you using, and you brought it up, and what came to mind was the slides or backgrounds as slides as the Zoom feature. But I thank you for mentioning what you're using there. Or I was gonna bring up at the end anyway, but thank you for that.
Yeah, and I know that there's different apps that you can use when you're doing a virtual presentation specifically. I know that OBS is I think they have a free and paid version. There's several different ways to use your PowerPoint presentation and get that across to the audience. But I like this app that I mentioned, because it's as simple as tech can get. You insert your slides and then you just click forward from one to the next. It's simplicity at its best. What it allows is for your slides to be right behind you in your background so that you're not separated. For example, when we're on Zoom and a speaker has a slide presentation and they just share the screen, suddenly we have the whole presentation taking up all the space, and then we have the speaker way off to the side in a little teeny box. And the reality is that as a speaker, we are the main focus. We're the main attraction. It's not meant to be the slides. The slides are secondary. They're the assistants, right, to get our message across, but we're the focus. So if I'm highlighting my slides because I've shared screen, now that's all you'll get to see. And if you record later, that's what's going to come up as well. You'll see the slides and you won't see me. So this feature, this app, it allows you to be in one corner of the presentation and have then the slides in the background, and you can move it around and make it fit your frame as you need. So it's incredibly handy. And all you have to do is just practice ahead of time, record yourself, watch again, get comfortable giving your presentation a few times, and then on the day of, you'll be all set. So it's great.
And the thing after I mentioned, the one thing, it came back to my mind what I was thinking about a minute ago when you said practice over and over again when you get to the point almost like breathing. And another interview came to mind when the late great Kobe Bryant was interviewed on my first podcast ever I listened to. I mentioned this a lot. Good shout out because it's the inspiration for this podcast. Lewis House School of Greatness. He interviewed Kobe Bryant right before tragically the accident and everything, and he talks about why he is how he got so good at basketball is because he was obsessive. For you,
right.
you almost have to be obsessive, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've been watching different speakers, including one gentleman called Cardone, and he says, be obsessed or be average. And truly, whatever you want to do in life, the people who shine the most are the ones who give it the most. We can't expect to be pro if we're not there practicing 24/7. And so it's like, how can you turn life into a practice session? How can you show up all the time, constantly? Even I shared today some tips for impromptu speaking with a club at Toastmasters. But it's not just thinking, oh, I'm going to practice impromptu speaking at Toastmasters. It's how can I practice that impromptu speaking in a conversation? How can I practice it on a podcast? How can I practice it when I'm recording a voice message? And it's finding all those different ways throughout the day to keep hitting on that target that we want to reach and make that our focus no matter where we are. So I completely agree. It's
So,
about
and
obsession.
not to mention, like the tech is one aspect, and then you're thinking about your audience that you're going to speak to in the next 5 minutes or the next day or the next week. There could be two different types of audience, or many different types of audience, depending on where you're going to speak, and it's knowing the audience too, that you keep that in mind. You keep your audience in mind. You know your audience. Like something came up. I don't get too much into like that, like what happened today, but like it happened like where it gives you so like something came up on I think mention of the detour. It gives you another detour where you could possibly go for like a different type of audience that oh, like maybe if I come up with this, then for a different audience. I kind of like getting off.
Yeah, no, it's
But
yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Yeah, you figure out what works for your audience. And sometimes, Tommy, I find that less is more. So I think there was at one point where we were wondering, how much is enough or too much in terms of presentations. For example, can you have too many slides? Is that too much for any given audience? And and to me, I don't know if it's as much having too many slides is as having slides that don't have too much content. A lot of times I have seen with speakers who are practicing in Toastmasters that they just want to load up that screen with like 100 or 200 words. And there's so much that you have to pay attention to that there's no time to listen to the speaker and his message because he's put it all out on the screen. So too much can happen in terms of content. And it doesn't matter what audience you have, they're not going to be able to focus on you if they're too focused on the message behind you. So rather than thinking, do I have too many slides? Ask yourself, do I have too much content displayed on those slides? And how can I put just enough content to reinforce my point without overloading the audience and having them spend half an hour reading what's behind me? I think that might be the real question, no matter what the audience is.
Mhm.
And then another tip that I've heard, Tommy, is that especially in our virtual world, we need a lot to keep us going. We need a lot of focus because we're not in person. We need something to captivate our attention. So I heard a tip expressed by Darren LaCroix. He's a world-renowned speaker. He says, turn the slides off. When you're sharing a story, you don't need slides. Let the focus be on you. Or if you're going to share a picture, share the picture, then go back to you. Turn the slides on and off so that there's always movement going on, and then we can keep our attention on the speaker when we need to, and then look at the slides when they're relevant as well.
That's great advice, and I remember he actually came to speak at one of the events that we were putting on one of the years. So I remember him. I'm familiar with him a little bit. How much is too much? You say, and less is more. I know you said. How much is too much, or too little, or is there such thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Too much is, like I said, too much content. Where there's so much content on your slides, we can't listen to you because we have to read what you've set out for us. And what I find is that it's easiest to just put maybe 5 words, 5, 6, 7 words on any given slide. And it's just to reinforce the main point. Another possibility is to just bring up one point at a time. So you'll have point 1, 5 or 6 words, point 2, 5 or 6 words, point 3, but don't show it on the screen all at once, because then I'm stuck reading it and you haven't even gotten to that point yet. So just space out your slides and do your points one point per slide, or have them come up on the slide one at a time. Another problem is when speakers use a lot of red in their writing. Now, I did have a few words that were in red in my presentation today, which was to highlight those words. But sometimes we have to be careful what colors we choose for the slide, because if it's a light yellow or a light blue, we might not be able to read it. So you always have to be watching. You need a dark background, light coloring, light background, dark coloring.
Contrast.
Red, you want to contrast, and the red you want to stay away from for the most part, because it's glaring and it's almost uncomfortable to stare at the color red too much on the screen. So there are just a few challenges to take into consideration when you're putting your slides together.
Yeah, and there's similarities with I'm been in the TV world, and same thing with red. Red bleeds on the screen, and we always say don't use red ever in your graphics text. Don't use the color red, especially with
right. Now, like I said, I used it today. I got away with that, but it was a key word here and there that I wanted to highlight, but it was not the whole text all the time. Blue is a much more relaxing color. Black, of course, we all know is the best. And it's just being careful how we present, because those can become distractions for our audience. And we want them to be engaged. We want them to be listening to us and not distracted by our content.
And avoid the color red. What came to mind when you were like saying that is like pick a different color that's a contrast to whatever color you're using, like black contrast with white. Pick another color if you want to highlight something, or like have like a circle with a highlight or something, like black background, white text. And I don't know what in that situation, if you're just doing that, that's the most simplest. But what would you use, just for hypothetical situation? What would you use to highlight on like a black background and white text? How would you?
Right. Well, exactly what you said. You do black background, white text, or you could do black and gray. You might be able to do black and yellow. And this is where also the branding comes in, because I know that most of us were trying to develop that brand. It's those brand colors that define everything we do. So we'll want our presentation to be with those brand colors. For example, I love the color red. So that does come in the way I dress. And then I try to match my outfit actually to my presentation. So whatever colors are my brand colors, I try to match my attire accordingly. And that provides a nice counterplay when they're all connected together.
So we started out talking tech, and then got into like how things appear on the screen. One thing before I want to like get one into and get back into like the too many slides question, but before, while we're on the same subject of appearing on the screen, we talked about colors, fonts. There's serif and sans serif. Do you have any like specific like experiences with either of those? Like I know the sans serif is better on screen, and then versus, do you have any experiences with that?
Yes. Based on the content that I'm presenting, I try to pick a font that matches. For example, there are some fun fonts. Today in the presentation, I used one that's called Chalkboard. And I have fun with that because it looks a little different. It looks like someone has written on a chalkboard. And we're talking about impromptu speaking. We're talking about answering questions in the moment. And it just fits the theme. It's this font. It fits that theme of being in the moment. If I were giving a more serious presentation, or if I wanted to give an elegant presentation to an elegant audience, maybe I would pick wording that flowed, where it has the loops and interlacing, where it looks flowery, perhaps. based on an elegant, based on the audience and the message that I'm trying to bring. So yes, you can match your font to the theme. The only observation is you just have to make sure that you're able to read it. I know that some fonts are hard to read. So if you are going to use a flowery font, then maybe you have to just make that word a little bigger, or just not make all your words with that font, so that we're not struggling to read the font, but so that it's there enough to make it fun, engaging, and interesting for the audience.
Yeah, great tips there with font and how things appear overall, whether it's coloring or fonts on the tech side of things. So going back, just one more thing. Two more. I wanted to just touch on the amount of slides or text. Some people, you mentioned earlier, some people like to add a bunch of text on a slide, but I wanted to ask, would it be better if, because pictures worth 1,000 words, would it be better to maybe find a picture that says what the text is trying to say and just have a picture? Because when there's pictures up, to me, I actually lose count of how many slides, because pictures are fun to look at a lot of the time.
And Tommy, you make an excellent point. You're absolutely right. There are times where pictures are better than words. For example, earlier today, I showed a picture of my Uncle Bob, and he's holding up a fish, because we're talking about fishing and how he's the expert, and how you can be the expert when you are specific, like he is with his words. And I don't need to put a bunch of wording on there. Just the picture says it all. And so you're right. And it's finding what is going to help the audience to take away this message. What's going to help get this point across? Is it going to be a picture? Is it going to be a graph? Is it going to be a statistic? What do I need that will most simply explain this point and make it relevant to the audience? So you're right. Pictures are great.
Pictures, and when you create and another tip and mentioned there, turn it off, from Darren LaCroix, who said this: turn off the slide when you don't need the slides to return the focus to you, and then come back with a picture and use the black screen. It's instead of turning the whole thing off, and this is going to transition nicely to the next part of software, but instead of turning the whole slide presentation off, make a black screen, and then just insert a black screen into your presentation, and then your slide presentation's off.
You make an excellent point. You are so right. And maybe that's a tip I need to implement myself, is where we wouldn't have to turn it off. We just go to the next slide, which is blank. So that's a fantastic observation.
When we open up work simpler, you go with the simplest way of things. Yeah, that's
make it easy on yourself. Find easy ways to do it. If it gets complicated, see, the more steps there are to any given process, the more opportunity to make mistakes. I remember I was doing this mathematical calculation for high school, and this one equation had 21 steps, and I did every single step right except for one. I made a mistake, and that one mistake made the whole equation wrong. And that's what can happen in speaking, is when our presentations require too many steps to implement, it's not that individually they're hard, but it's when we put them all together that they get complicated. So it's always a matter of finding, how can I simplify my process and make it easy on myself, so that I can be fully present for the audience and not focused on all of the different media and technology. And what you might consider is perhaps you build on your presentation. Perhaps you start slowly, and then you implement that technology a little at a time, so that maybe it does get complicated, but you've had so much time working on it that you've just built it slowly, and you're good at each step before you go on to the next one.
Point example, one moving into we're in this world right now, and what's been really awkward, and I've really finally, it started like for me, really getting awkward when I've done it several times in this conversation too, and it has been it's awkward when I'm not like looking at the camera, when I'm looking away. It finally got to that point, like if I'm not looking at like the eyes right here, it actually is awkward for me when I'm not looking at the camera now. And for the longest time since we've been in this digital world, it's just been one of the biggest struggles, and it keeps coming up with people like to like when we giving evaluations or feedback, looking at the camera, like when you're
Yes.
in this world.
Yes, yes, and I've heard comments from people saying you can put recommendations of putting a little smiley face by your camera, or even printing out a clip art of a person and their face so that you're looking
Mm.
at someone rather than just looking at the camera. You've got it stuck to your computer, and so you're looking at this clip art picture of somebody's face, and helping you to remember, because it's hard. And this came up today. We're looking down at the person on our screen, and the minute I look down to see you, I'm not actually looking at you, and that's hard for the audience who's on the other side of that camera.
You took it one step further than what I heard. I was imagine the camera is that one person you're talking to, but you actually said put a picture of them up on the camera, so it's
Exactly.
even simpler.
Well, because you're helping yourself, because it's hard to just tell yourself, I'm going to stare into the camera. I'm going to stare into the camera. Well, just put a picture of someone up there, and look at them,
And then
and
it
that way you don't
becomes
have to imagine. They're actually a
yeah,
visual there for you.
yeah, and then it becomes, what do I want to say to this person? And now
Hmm.
you tend to not forget as much.
Exactly.
So I want to get into like the process of when you did decide, hey, I need a presentation for this speech coming up. I'm giving in a week. What's the process? What like you a PC versus Mac? What's the whole process of building the slides? Like not the whole process, but like when you're do you have a second operator maybe to help you out as assistants? Like what does that kind of look like right before the speech, and then when you're setting up, when you're preparing for it?
So far, I've been on my own in terms of preparation. But what I do if I know I have an upcoming presentation is, and by the way, I use Mac. I used to use PC, but I switched to Mac a few years ago. And I find what I like about Mac is that it has this one feature where you can flip with your fingers on your touchpad. You just flip back and forth, and it will change between slides. So you don't have to be clicking one and the other. And I can be going through a lot of different uh, windows that I've got open just by flicking my fingers. So when I'm going to put together a presentation, I've heard people say, don't start with your slides, start with your presentation. But I do it backwards. I go to PowerPoint and I start thinking, I make a list of my topic that I want to discuss. What are the 3 main ideas, or what are the 5 main ideas that I think are absolutely essential? And then I make a list of maybe 10 or 15 ideas. For example, we're talking about impromptu speaking. What are the 10 or 15 different concepts that I absolutely think people need to know to be outstanding with impromptu speaking? So I make my list, and then I start marking off the ones that I'm thinking, no, they've probably heard that somewhere else. No, they can probably get that practiced in Toastmasters. And I try to narrow in on those topics that I think maybe they've never heard before, or where I see people are struggling a lot. And then I focus on those. Once I have the main ideas that I want to speak about, I start building my slides. And I'm a speaker who uses a lot of slides because I'm a visual learner. And this is another point. We have to remember, not all of our audience are visual learners. Some are tactile, some are kinesthetic, some are auditory, where they need to be able to speak and rehash what they've learned in order to actually embed that in their thinking. And we have to remember that. But for me, I'm visual. So I go to my presentation, I go to my slides, Let's say I've got my 3 main points. And then I start asking myself, how can I make sure that by the time I'm done, these 3 main points are with my audience? They're so much a part of my audience that they're not going to forget. And I try to switch it up. So for example, maybe for one point I'll show a picture. Maybe for another point I'll share a story. Perhaps for another point I need some kind of graph or statistic. I try to vary it so it's not the same every single time. We want it to be engaging and interesting. We don't want it to be monotonous. So how can we switch it up? There's lots of different ways to get the audience engaged. And then you can ask yourself, how can I get my audience to participate? Can we do a poll? Can we do some kind of a quiz? Can we ask them a question? Especially in the virtual world, we need the audience to stay with us. And these are different ways that they can stay on track and be focused on the material and the content. So I get my 3 main points, I figure out the slides, come up with that introduction and that conclusion, and just make sure that every slide is adding to the main point. Everything has to add to the main point of what I'm trying to say. And if it doesn't add, we got to cut it. It's got to build on the theme. So that's the process that I go through for my presentations.
Yeah, okay. My next point that I wanted to get into is this smooth how to get into making your from the tech using opening it up. How do you have any tips? 1, 2, 3 tips on making that process. You mentioned simpler. Maybe 3 tips on what you did from what you learned from your experience in the past, what you do, and it's always a work in progress. But give some value here to tips on a smooth tech presentation experience.
For sure. First of all, like I said earlier, practice is key. It's practicing and recording yourself. There's a lot of apps that allow us to speak into the camera on our computer, and so we can give our presentation and the computer will record us. And for the app that I use, which is called which I mentioned earlier, it has a record feature to it. So I could actually give my whole presentation. I could practice switching the slides from one to the next, and then I could go back and rewatch. And I'll be able to see, did I look away? Did I pause? Did I stumble? Did I forget which slide was next? And I can watch my performance before I ever give it to the world. And so I can validate it and make sure it's ready, and then I can hand it out. So practicing, like I said, recording yourself, watching back, that is huge. A second tip to make a smooth delivery is practicing on somebody else. Because there was a day where I was using this app and I thought it was great. I put together this new presentation. I thought it was fabulous. And I delivered it, and someone told me, the slides are actually blurry. We can't read what's on the screen. I couldn't figure out what's going on. So I had to go back and give the presentation to a friend and get their perspective to tell me, yes, when you made this switch, then now I can see it, or now the video came through clearly. So we may need to test out our technology on a third party before we actually give it to the world. And they may see elements that we missed because there was no way for us to know how it was being received on the other end. And a third tip, and Tommy, I think this one is maybe the most important one. And let me tell you a story about this. I was watching, well, let me just say the tip. The third tip is to be prepared that your technology is going to fail. Assume that at some point your technology will fail and you'll have to go without it. I was watching a performance. It was all these different speakers on stage for a conference. And I noticed, and we're talking, these are professional people. They are the top of their industry when it comes to their subject area. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily the top speakers. They're just the top in their industry. And I noticed them struggling with technology because a few of them had challenges where the technology failed. And one person in particular had a hard time moving forward because he kept saying, well, this slide isn't working. Can we get this fixed? And well, in the meantime, while they fixed the slide, and all the focus was going to his slides, but really he's the one with the message. And so tip number 3 is that you have to be prepared for your technology to fail. So what that means is that have a printout of all your slides. If slides are what are directing your presentation, print them out so that if they fail, you just keep going. When you're pro, someone who is pro, it means that no matter what happens, they're so smooth you couldn't even tell that there was a mistake. So to get to that pro level, you have to prepare your mind and say, plan for it. Plan for it. Assume something will happen with my technology. It won't work. What will I do? Why? Because if you plan for it and you prepare, when it happens, it won't take you by surprise. You were already ready for it. So ask yourself, if my slides quit working, what will I do? If my slides don't show up, can I give all of this verbatim without having those cues? Do I need to have a little card with my main points written out on it in case my slides fail? I have a backup plan. And as they say, luck favors the prepared, because we took steps to ensure that nothing would interfere with the delivery of the value to the audience. So that would be the 3 tips. And the number 3, you just have to assume technology will not always be there 100% of the time.
Right. Great tips. And if you're thinking of that one person that you want, that you're talking to, that you think of the one person that needs to hear the message. If you have that person on the camera, the picture of them, or what about, like, just to go away from the tech side of things, if you're speaking, like, would you include that person, like a cardboard cutout of that person in like a chair in the audience? Would that? I was just thinking of that too, like non-tech side.
Interesting. You're saying, would you have a cardboard cutout of the person that you're trying to speak to?
And put it, like, to direct your eye contact too, like put it somewhere, like, and then focus on that cardboard out in the audience. Would that be, would you think that would be a good idea?
That's a new idea I've never considered before. I'm gonna have to try that and tell you.
I just, it would direct your eye contact to
Mhm.
that cardboard cutout.
Yes, and as far as being on stage, Tommy, what I have heard is when you're on stage, you want to try to divide the room into sections. In other words, instead of just randomly scanning through the crowd, you want to have like section 1, section 2, section 3, and if you were in such a big audience you had a balcony, then balcony. But that's why you look at each quadrant and you just look at them for a few seconds. Middle quadrant, third quadrant, and just divide the room and figure out ahead of time how you're going to make sure that everybody feels like they're the center of attention for your speech.
Yeah, great tips today. I have a few bonus wrap up questions, and I want to get into, like, what you're doing. Like, if you have any shows, or like if anything out there that you're give the value that you're giving to people. I want to give a chance to, like, the website and everything, but I want to also acknowledge you for, like, earlier, like, you mentioned the app, and, like, wow, that was the showed up great. Like, you showed up on, you're off to the side, but and your slide was right there. I thought you were doing something different, but I want to acknowledge it for you, making that look so great, smooth transition. Like, the transitions were your flaws, even when you had to. You made you centered up, and it was just you for a minute, and your slides kind of went away for a second. Like, you knew when to move the camera, you knew where, how to move yourself back to the side for your slides again. So acknowledge you, if you did that all in the moment very well. So acknowledge you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Right.
I knew that if I stayed off to the side, I was going to be too small. I was trying to demonstrate an object lesson, and I needed that object lesson to now take precedence over the slides that I had in my background. And so, yes, I move the slides off, which, by the way, there is a chance in Zoom where you can actually incorporate yourself into the slides, but it is not as easy to use, and it does not have the feature of putting the slides just on one side of your screen. So that's where the app that I used is incredibly valuable in allowing you to manipulate your space entirely and put it under your control. So thank you, Tommy. Thank you. And the credit goes to the app because it really helps a lot.
I know you can like adjust the size in the Zoom feature. You can adjust the size of how you show up. You can, it's just like a text box. You shrink it or grow it, or you can move it around. It'll look kind of like to other people watching. You'll just end up being floating around the screen though. So I don't know how
Yeah.
authentic that
Yeah.
looks.
Yeah. That does happen on the Zoom account. It's true. And as far as people reaching out, Tommy, I know you mentioned that I am working on building my website. So for now, you can reach me on LinkedIn, Elyssa Schneider, and perhaps we can share that information if there's anywhere else to put it. So Elyssa Schneider on LinkedIn. You can email me, ElyssaSchneiderSpeaks@gmail.com. ElyssaSchneiderSpeaks@gmail.com.
All right, we'll pop that all in the notes for this episode too. Anything specifically or anything special projects you're working on right now that we have to look forward to?
I've been giving this session on table topics, so I have a variety of just links and videos. And we, of course, you and I, Tommy, did a podcast on table topics a few months back, so that is on there too. As far as impromptu speaking, in the future, I am looking to focus full time on discussing mental health. As a depression survivor, 25 years, and I finally figured out what was going on. I know that there are a lot of people who are struggling, so I am doing research right now to be able to show the connection between depression and toxicity, and it being a toxicity of the whole body, not just a mental issue, but it's actually a physical issue. So as I continue putting that together, then I'll have more content to share and bring you all into it, because we all know somebody who's struggling and they deserve to have hope and to have answers. So as soon as I've got that, I'll bring back all that information for you.
Yeah, and we actually done my other podcast, which I'm pretty. This is my personal one, Keeping It Real podcast. But D50 After Dark, I do for Toastmasters, and I did have you on that one, and I'm not the host of that one. I just produced that one. But we touch on all of that. You tell your story on depression as a bonus, and we go into the table topics too. So definitely we have that to check out, and I can link that up too as well in this episode.
Absolutely.
So we're come to the time where you've been coming on as kind of an expert in table topics here, and now time to put that to the test with my bonus questions. And even it's coming from my memory now. I don't have to read it off paper anymore because I've been doing this. If you listened, you know the questions, but I try to make these questions think. So my first bonus question today, it comes to, from your experience with any tech that you use, whether it's speaking or maybe something else that you've used, what are three, if you want to stay on the speaking world, that's fine too. What are three undeniable truths that you've come to learn about the use of technology in your world, this world?
One truth is that it doesn't matter how good your technology is. If your content is a mess, you're in trouble.
So true.
First truth, you have to have good content. You have to go through the trouble of putting together the research, of analyzing, of observing, doing the studies, finding the quotes, putting your stories together, because on the day that your tech fails, your content will still shine and you'll still have value to bring. Truth number two. Know when to, like we said earlier, know when to use your slides and know when not to. Know when to lean in with your message. and reach the audience hearts. And that truth is actually how to make your content applicable. And that's why you have to ask yourself, if my technology is going to connect me further to my audience, then I will use it. If my technology is of benefit to my audience, then I'll use it. But if it's not adding value, if it's just detracting, then I need to take it out. And it's always having that mindset. This is the second truth, is having that mindset of what is best for my audience. I'm here to serve them, right? Especially as a speaker. Although in any facet of life, whether we walk into a job or we go to Toastmasters, asking ourselves, how can I serve the people around me? And in particular with technology, how can I serve my audience? Does this technology serve them? Does it hinder them? I want to put in the work. I want to do my best because I want it to be beneficial to them. So we have to know why. It's our why. Why do we do what we do? And it's for our audience. It's for everybody else. And truth number 3, it's better to show up and not do it perfectly than to not show up at all. I have struggled my whole life with being perfectionistic. And a lot of that ties into the depression that I faced. I've lived with this voice in my head that tells me every day, I'm not good enough. What I just did sucked. It was terrible. Everybody's probably talking about it, how bad it was. They'll never invite you back again. So many times when I get up to speak, I've heard that voice in my head. And I had to say to it, I'm not listening to you today. I refuse to believe you, and I don't accept it. And then showing up. The challenge is that when you make mistakes, the voice gets louder and it starts to tell you, see, I told you. I told you were going to fail. I told you were such a loser. And so it's being willing to accept the challenge of making those mistakes and reinforcing to yourself, no matter what the voices in your head say, it's okay. You showed up today. You did your best. If you did your best, that's what counts. Did you do your best? Did you give it what you had on that given day? Because our energy levels will vary from one day to the next. But did you give it all you had that day to that audience or to that person in your life? Did you give it all? Maybe you weren't perfect, but you were there. You weren't perfect, but you're present. And that is the universal truth. Be present, not perfect.
Love it. There comes up, like, I love what you said when that voice was it's the way you think around that voice and how you take your own voice when you hear that and it says you're not good enough. You have to make that a condition. You're not good enough if you don't do this. Not just you're not good enough. If you don't do this, yeah, you're not going to be good enough, and accept that. If you're not willing to put in the work, then yeah, you're still not going to be good enough. But you're not good enough if this doesn't happen. Make that conditional instead of making other stuff like. I gotta get too much of that, but yeah, conditional. Great truths. And the next thing is 3 lessons that you've learned over your time when you're speaking tech, and 3 lessons. You know, we talked about tips, but like lessons that others can take from your advice. 3 lessons on using tech in speaking.
Well, lesson number 1 is train yourself to look for feedback. In Toastmasters, that's drilled into us. If you give a speech, you get an evaluation. But in life, sometimes we have to go and find the feedback. So go out of your way to ask the questions. If you see someone who is standing out in your world, like you are, Tommy, with the tech, then I know that when I have a question about tech, I need to go ask you. I need to have a conversation with you and have you share with me, what did you do? What worked for you? What can I learn from you? It's interesting because I have a friend in London and he is an amazing speaker. And I said to him, he volunteered to help me. And I said, man, you must have everybody knocking at your door trying to get your help because you're a fantastic speaker. And he said to me, actually not. He said, no, most times I don't get that many people asking for help. And I thought, are you serious? Really? He said, yeah. And it just goes to show that we are exposed to people with knowledge and wisdom but that doesn't mean that we're reaching out for it. And we need to train ourselves to reach out for that feedback and that advice. And how can we get to the next step? And finding someone who's at the next level where we want to be, who can help us implement. So that would be one lesson. Is it lessons or tips? Tips. Tip number 2.
Lesson, yeah.
And this ties into the first one, but always be looking for new techniques to implement. I just listened to a famous speaker whose name I can't recall, but he was one of the first people to be on YouTube, and he made apparently thousands, if not millions of dollars because of this one video that he recorded with his, I think it was a Corvette behind him. It was just a home video with the Corvette. And he made so much money on it because he said, I was willing to try the technology, this new technology that no one had gotten into yet. And I just said, I'll give it a try. So for us to be open-minded, to always be trying new ideas, implementing new features and facets, it's easy to stay with what we know, but we will only grow if we add value each time to our own personal toolbox and try out different technologies that are available. And tip number 3 would be to just be yourself. Be yourself. Be willing to be yourself because you'll connect. Whether it is using technology, be yourself. Let the quirky you come through. Let the funny you come through. Let who you are come through, whoever you're with. Give the true self to everybody, every time, every day. And use the technology to do it. Some people are really funny. You could put together a funny video. You could dress up. You could come with a costume. There's so many ideas that we can share, but people can tell if we're being authentic. And that plays to one final point, which is to be willing to be vulnerable. Be willing to be open, because everybody is facing challenges and no one wants to talk about them. So be brave enough to be the person that is willing to be vulnerable, not just on a one-on-one, but on a wide scale. And you will touch so many lives. And if you want to use the technology to be vulnerable, then do so. But show up as yourself and leave nothing on the table. Just give it all.
Yeah, they're great truths, great lessons. And before getting to the final question, I yeah, when you talk about being vulnerable, know that if you haven't done something before and you want to get into it, know that it's going to be bad your first time around. But if you keep at it, if you keep doing it, just do it the next time, despite that it's bad, it will be better. Because you not without even trying, without even putting in the work, it'll be better like 1%, because your mind is, you want to get to that next step a little better than it was before. But put in the work too, and then it'll be tremendously better.
Absolutely. And you're right. We're not going to be perfect. That's why, for your audience that's not familiar with Toastmasters is great, because everybody's there practicing. We're all in it together. We're all on the same level. And it's okay. It's okay. It's a safe place to fail, because we can get better, we can get stronger, and we do it together. So if you're not in Toastmasters, for those of you in the audience, consider joining, because it's a great environment.
Since we're in a little Toastmasters plug right now, I'm going to tell a little short story. Keep it to table topic links at least. But my first speech I got up there was not. This was back in 2013. I was in Houston, and I got in front of. We're back at a Denny's restaurant in north side of Houston, and most of my speech was dead air, or what we call dead air when we're on podcast or radio, dead air. But silence, thought. I still do that today. People say I have the power of the pause, but that's besides the point right now. But look at me today. I'm hosting a podcast. It started in 2017, and Toastmasters, a few other things I've gotten to, some training, certain trainings I did as well at School of Greatness. I got into that helped. Like I always like to like boost up that as well, but just for my thinking and mindset today, I'm not that person. I'm talking more. Probably feel more of an extrovert. So that's Toastmaster. Going back to the Toastmasters plug, we're plugging Toastmasters. But anything that we left off before I get to my final question that you think is important that we didn't touch on yet?
Well, I would say, I know we talked about seeking out people and seeking out mentors, but I know that there's just a lot to be learned. And that always think the presentation that you gave today is not the best presentation. The best presentation is the one you'll give next time. So you can even tell your audience, this isn't the best one you'll hear. Come next week and it will be even better.
Actually,
Because
yeah.
because as we're always going to be adding in, and especially we're investing money. This is what I've been learning recently, is be willing to invest in yourself, in your brand, in your education. That is an investment that cannot be lost. I mean, be willing to spend the money. Don't let the money hold you back, because the next level that you want to reach is going to come because you got knowledge from somebody who's where you want to be. And sometimes we have to spend the money to get there. But when we do, that money will pay out many, many times over. So rather than thinking about, oh, I'm going to invest this money and in the long run, after many years, it's going to make me a lot of money, start thinking about investing in yourself. Pay the money, get the courses, get the books, get the training, because we'll reach a limit to how far we can get. And then we need another person to break that barrier, that ceiling that we've reached, and help us break through to the next level. So invest in yourself. That is the best kind of investment. And when you invest in yourself, at the end of the day, you're investing in others. So take the plunge, take the leap.
Take the leap, yes. And thank you for your time. And we're at that time for the final question. Thank you for giving us that. We're going essentially an hour into the episode, and we're at the final question. Acknowledge you again for everything that you do, showing up and all this podcast, going to different Toastmasters clubs, speaking what you know about table topics and depression. Just wanted to acknowledge you that before I bring up the final question. And that final question is, what is your definition of innovation?
To me, innovation is taking the resources that you have and doing something great. Life is not perfect. I found this out the hard way. And there's so many days where I feel like I don't have all the resources that it takes to get where I want to go. When I struggled with the depression, I later found out I was struggling. What I was really struggling with was heavy metal toxicity, which was causing the depression. But it didn't just cause depression, it was causing cognitive impairment. I know it sounds crazy, like perhaps I sound completely normal and fine, and I am. I've done a lot of treatments, I'm feeling better. But for the last couple of years, when I was out there trying to work on speeches, giving workshops, I was dealing with cognitive impairment. My memory was affected, my ability to think on my feet was affected. And there was just different aspects. I could not sit down to write. To this day, sitting down to write is really hard for me, because some part of my brain that is dealing with that cognitive impairment has been affected. And so I've had to bring in that innovation, to your point, Tommy. The innovation of saying, how can I work around it? How can I find a different way? For me, relying on slides has been helpful because it triggers the next thought. I know where I'm going because I see the slide and then I remember. So I'm helping my memory. But innovation is taking what we have, where we are, and just doing everything we can with it to get to the next level, even if it's not perfect. Because we'll perhaps never have all the money that we need, or all the time or all the resources, but how can we do amazing and get the amazing results with what we've got? And somehow, despite all that cognitive and all that impairment and the depression, using that innovation, I was able to win the district level championship for impromptu speaking in London, despite the challenges. And so it is possible. It is possible. You just have to have the mindset of, I'm going to make this happen no matter what. I'm going to reach those goals no matter what. And I don't accept failure. Failure's not an option. We're going to get there. Whether it's plan A, plan B, plan C, or plan Z, last letter of the alphabet, we will get there. So let's make it happen.
Go no matter what. Do it no matter what. And always be asking what's next.
And that to me is innovation. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Thank you for time today. Go check out that. I'm going to link it up here in the notes here. Go right now. We're ending this right now, this episode. But go check out that talk, especially if you're a Toastmaster, because we talk about, I think we did 3 of your 5 tips in that episode. And then we also do a bonus episode on depression too. So go check that out. And thanks, Elyssa, for stopping by here today, keeping it real.
Thanks,
Tech
Tommy.
time, story time. I'm Sweet Tea.
This has been awesome. Thank you for the invitation.
We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. It's always a blast exploring the tech universe with you. But alas, it's time to wrap things up. If you've got burning tech questions or just want to say hello, remember you can reach out to us on our website, social media, or drop us an email. We love hearing from you. And if you found this episode as electrifying as we did, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback helps us keep the tech goodness flowing. Don't forget to share Tech Time with Sweet Tea with your fellow techies. The more, the merrier, right? As we sign off today, always remember that tech is a tool and it's here to serve you. So use it wisely, explore fearlessly, and keep it real in your tech adventures. Stay curious, stay connected, and keep rocking the digital world. Catch you on the next episode of Tech Time with Sweet Tea.